The Tampa Bay Lightning are all in for one more run at glory. Adam Denker discusses what the team did at the trade deadline and how it impacts the rest of the season. Next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Lightning, Adam Denker. And Adam, were you surprised by the two moves made by the Lightning on trade deadline day?
Absolutely, Gil. Especially, I don't think anyone even imagined after that initial trade that the Lightning made where they were just basically taking on Adam Henrique's salary. That's really all it came down to in that three-team trade. That they were going to make a splash like this. You kind of figured, when you start to retain salary and taking on draft picks, that's when you start to kind of nail the coffin of the end of the season for you and your playoff chances. But boy, did they prove everyone and surprise everyone with getting Anthony Duclair and then a little nice move, picking up Matt Dumba as the trade deadline came to a close on Friday. I think expectations are starting to pick up more in Tampa Bay, and that's crazy to say considering it was probably at an all-time low, and then hours later, boom, people are starting to say, could this team get back on the right track?
Where do you see Duclair and Dumba fitting into the lineup?
Well, Duclair is one of those guys that I said initially when the trade went through that he's one of those guys that's literally been around the block. I mean, he's been on, I believe, 6 NHL teams in 10 years, and he's played with teams that have been very good. He's been with teams that have been very bad, and he could do a little bit of everything, but of course, the one thing that he brings to the table that perks up a lot of people is his ability to score, and he did that in his first game the other night against the Flyers. And he's going to be so instrumental for this Lightning team down the stretch if they are still serious about making some noise in the playoffs. And Matt Dumba on the other side of that is going to add some more depth to this defensive back end for the Lightning. They've just been really, last time I was here a week ago, we spoke about how really it was just, that's been such a weak point for this Lightning team all season long. And then you go out and get a guy like that. Is he going to be make or break for a Stanley Cup run? No, but he's going to be the guy that's going to give you a chance and going to allow you to actually have a chance at playing a full 60-minute game. Another thing that the Lightning have failed to do all season long. So he's going to bring veteran leadership, as well as Duclair does, veteran leadership and the ability to give you even more of a chance to win games.
Do you think this is sort of the last opportunity for this core group to make a run?
That's hard to really say. It's one of those things where a lot of these guys, they've been around for what seems like 20 years in Tampa Bay. Stamkos, Headman, really the two top guys on this team that have been around the longest. Headman's not having a good year. Stamkos has really been highlighted throughout the course of this year for his limitless with his style of play. And it's one of those things where I think a lot of people within the organization as well as in the fan base feel that they are talented enough to kind of make it work down the road as they even start to get a little bit older in age in terms of, playing hockey, not in life. And it's one of those things, though, where I said on my show, I think it really comes down to both of them. If Headman is breaking down at a substantial rate and Stamkos isn't going to be able to be productive anymore, it's really one of those things where you're going to have to really put on your big boy pants as a GM and as an organization and make the tough decision. But I think really, to answer your question, I think, if all the cards fall in the right way, you can get maybe 3-5 more years of high level competitive hockey and, get back to that contender status that we've seen them be in over the last 3 or 4 years.
So we're coming down the stretch run now, less than 20 games left in the regular season. Tampa Bay in a very tough fight for those last couple of playoff spots. What are the keys for the Lightning to lock up a playoff spot and then go on some kind of a playoff run?
Well, I'm sure I've said it here on this show when we've talked about what the Lightning need to do on any given night. It really, they have to go out there and win games that they're supposed to win. Best example recently has been the loss that they suffered to Calgary. I mean, that's a game, regardless of, how you're playing at that point in time. You just look at these two rosters, especially with the moves that Calgary made within the last 24 hours prior to that game. You're talking about a team that is really looking for a lottery spot now, whereas the Lightning are still obviously having playoff dreams, and for them to go out and lose that game, especially at home, is really at this point in the season, Gil, unacceptable. And that's really where it starts is you got to win the games that you're supposed to win. I've said it on my show where if you go out there, especially with this big stretch that they got coming up, they got the Rangers, the Panthers, and the Knights all in a 3-game set. And that's one of the things where, if you win one out of those 3 and they're all tight games that, it just comes down to who's better on the ice, I'm willing to look another way with that. But if you're going against teams, like I said, that are looking at lottery spots that are really their season is done, then that's an issue. The other thing is that they really have to focus on to end the season on a good note and to hold on to a playoff spot is to really play better in front of Vasilevsky. Now that you got the piece, like I said, all your problems aren't solved. It's not like, okay, Stanley Cup or bust, but it's one of those things now where what you lacked before, that problem at least has, for the time being, been taken care of. And maybe now you could start to play better in front of your goaltender. And I'm going to add kind of like another part to that is that basically Andrei Vasilevsky needs to play better. The biggest anticipation this year for the Lightning was him coming back after he missed the first 2 months of the season to off-season surgery on his back. And he's shown very little flashes here and there. And unfortunately, him being an average goaltender at times isn't really enough for this Lightning team, especially when, you're trying to justify, the money that you are spending on this guy when you guys are basically up against the cap on a daily basis. So a lot of things need to happen for the Lightning down the stretch in order for them to stay on the playoff track. And as we both know, sometimes that stuff doesn't happen perfectly, but, if they could get the ball rolling, especially with this big 3-game set coming up ahead of them this week, I mean, anything's on the table.
Tell me the difference about the attitude and the atmosphere in the locker room today compared to before these 2 deals went down.
Well, it goes back to the veteran leadership. Now, anyone that's been following the Lightning knows, this team has a ton of leaders. They have a ton of guys that have been there for quite some time. But that kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about when we're talking about how good Anthony Duclair is that he's, like I said before, he's been around the league he's been in the league since he was 19, and he's been in every environment. He's been in almost every market and any kind of market that you come across this league. And so nothing is lost upon him when he goes into a locker room. And for a guy like that to come in and not only be able to be another glue guy in the locker room, but also be the guy who could come in and help you produce offensively, that's a huge intangible. As well as on top of that, him and Matt Dumba are super close. So, right, there's going to be no misconceptions about, anybody being on whatever page that they need to be on, because the 2 guys coming in, they're close. Some of the guys, are very familiar, obviously, with Anthony Duclair during his time in Florida with the Panthers. So there is that familiarity there as well. So I think really Duclair, picking him up, skills aside, I think him being the kind of personality that he is, easygoing, just being a leader, that's really got a lot of the guys jacked up in the locker room, and you saw it on Saturday when they dropped 7 goals on the Flyers. So, if they pick up a win here and there against this big set of teams that I talked about, all 3 that are all contenders to win the Stanley Cup, I mean, that's really going to help this team mentally going forward, because as we saw before the trade deadline, guys were defeated. They were skating back to the benches between shifts with their heads down. So, to be able to bring in that fresh new life, that's going to be a huge deal for this team going forward.
All right, Adam, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find the podcast and where they can find you on social media?
Well, you can find the podcast wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. I've very much enjoyed all the comments we've been getting. A lot of people saying that they don't like the Duclair trade. Well, how about that goal? How about them apples, right, Lightning fans? So you go ahead, comment on any video below that you see when you come to the page. The most recent one would be more helpful than not. Throw us your questions, throw us your comments. We'd love to hear. And as I often do on the show, I love to answer them right off the bat. So go ahead and do that. And if you want to reach out to me directly, go ahead on Twitter or X at DenkyDank, DenkyD8NK. So hopefully, we'll be talking more about how the Lightning are looking more like a playoff team every single day rather than, them back to their old ways.
All right, Adam, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You could even pick who's going to win it all. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. And it's not just college hoops. Hockey fans, check out all the latest odds and prop bets for your favorite hockey team as well. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel.com/lockedon, and bet on college hoops till they tear down the nets.